Welcome to my channel. I am Daisy, your hostess, and in this video, we're going through the book by Ralph Waldo Trine titled What All the World's A-Seeking. If you found me at this video, perhaps there is something that you need to hear. Perhaps there is something that you've been seeking for and kind of looking for the way on how to get to that love, that happiness, that prosperity. And perhaps in these next few words that we share from this author, you may find it. And to quote this author, let's remember that it is only that which comes from the heart that can reach the heart. And understanding that the great law of our being, that we become like those things we contemplate upon. So think about the things that you think of most, and in the sense and spirit of which you think of them. And then take a look at what you have created in your life. It is not too late if what you seek is still not here. And perhaps we might need to make a little adjustment on how we're thinking of these things and in the spirit of our thoughts. All right, let's move on now to Chapter 3, The Unfoldment. If you'd have a rare growth and unfoldment supreme and make life one long joy and contentment complete, then with kindness, love, and goodwill, let it teem, and with service for all, make it fully replete. If you'd have all the world and all heaven to love you, and that love with its power would fully convince, then love all the world, and man royal and true will make cry as you pass, God bless him, the prince. One beautiful feature of this principle of love and service is that this phase of one's personality or nature can be grown. I have heard it asked, if one hasn't it to any marked degree naturally, what is to be done? In reply, let it be said, forget self, get out of it for a little while, and as it comes in your way, do something for someone, some kind service, some loving favor. It makes no difference how small it may appear. But a kind look or word to one weary with care, from whose life all worth living for seems to have gone out, a helping hand, or a little gift to one almost discouraged. It may be that this is just the critical moment. A helping hand just now may change a life or a destiny. Show yourself a friend to one who thinks he or she is friendless. Oh, there are 1,000 opportunities each day right where you are. Not the great things far away, but the little things right at hand. With a heart full of love, do something. Experience the rich returns that will come to you, and it will be unnecessary to urge a repetition or a continuance. The next time, it will be easier and more natural, and the next. You know of that wonderful reflex nerve system you have in your body, that which says that whenever you do a certain thing in a certain way, it is easier to do the same thing the next time, and the next, and the next, until presently it is done with scarcely any effort on your part at all. It has become your second nature. And thus we have what? Habit. This is the way that all habit is, the way that all habit must be formed. And have you ever fully realized that life is, after all, merely a series of habits, and that it lies entirely within one's own power to determine just what that series shall be? I have seen this great principle made the foundation principle in an institution of learning. It is made not a theory merely as I have seen it here and there, but a vital living truth. And I wish I had time to tell of its wonderful and beautiful influences upon the life and work of that institution, and upon the lives and the work of those who got out from it. A joy indeed to be there. One cannot enter within its walls, even for a few moments, without feeling its benign influences. One cannot go out without taking them with him. I have seen purposes in lives almost or quite transformed, and life so rich, so beautiful, and so valuable opened up, such as the persons never dreamed could be, by being but a single year under these beautiful and life-giving influences. I have also seen it made the foundation principle of a great summer congress, one that has already done an unprecedented work. One that has a far greater work yet before it, and chiefly by reason of this all-powerful foundation upon which it is built, conceived and put into operation as it was by a rare and highly illumined soul, one thoroughly filled with the love of service for all the humankind. There are no thoughts of money returns, for everything it has to give is as free as the beautiful atmosphere that pervades it. The result is that there is drawn together, by way of its magnificent corps of lecturers as well as those in attendance, a company of people of the rarest type, so that everywhere there is a manifestation of that spirit of love, helpfulness, and kindliness that permeates the entire atmosphere with a deep feeling of peace that makes every moment of life a joy. So enchanting does this spirit make the place that very frequently the single day of some who have come for this length of time has lengthened itself into a week, and the week in turn into a month, and the single week of others has frequently lengthened itself first into a month, then into the entire summer. There is nothing at all strange in this fact, however, for whenever one finds sweet humanity, he there finds a spot where all people love to dwell. Making this the fundamental principle of one's life, around which all others properly arrange and subordinate themselves, is not, as a casual observer might think, and as he sometimes suggests, an argument against one's own growth and development, against the highest possible unfoldment of one's entire personality and powers. Rather, on the other hand, is it one of the greatest reasons, one of the greatest arguments in its favor. For the stronger the personality and the greater the powers, the greater the influence in the service of mankind. If then life be thus founded, can there possibly be any greater incentive to that self-development that brings one up to their highest possibilities? A development merely for self alone can never have behind it an incentive, a power so great. And after all, there is nothing in the world so great, so effective in the service of mankind, as a strong, noble, and beautiful manhood or womanhood. It is this that in the ultimate determines the influence of everyone upon their fellow man. Life, character, is the greatest power in the world, and character it is that gives the power. For in all true power, along whatever line it may be, it is, after all, living the life that tells. This is a great law that but few who would have great power and influence seem to recognize, or at least that but few seem to act upon. Are you a writer? You can never write more than you yourself are. Would you write more? Then broaden, deepen, enrich the life. Are you a minister? You can never raise men higher than you have raised yourself. Your words will have exactly the sound of the life whence they came. Hollow the life? Hollow sounding and empty will be the words, weak, ineffective, false. Would you have them go with greater power and thus be more effective? Live the life. The power will come. Are you an orator? The power and effectiveness of your words in influencing and moving masses of people depends entirely upon the altitude from which they are spoken. Would you have them more effective, each one filled with a living power? Then elevate the life. The power will come. Are you in the walks of private life? Then, wherever you move, there goes from you, even if there be no words spoken, a silent but effective influence of an elevating or a degrading nature. Is the life high, beautiful? Then the influences are inspiring, life-giving. Is it low, devoid of beauty? The influences then are disease-laden, death-dealing. The tones of your voice, the attitude of your body, the character of your face, all are determined by the life you live. All, in turn, influence for better or for worse all who come within your radius. And if, as one of Earth's great souls has said, the only way truly to help a man is to make him better than the tremendous power of merely the life itself. Why, I know personally a young man of splendid qualities and gifts who was rapidly on the way of ruin, as the term goes. gradually losing control of himself day after day, self-respect almost gone. Already the thought of taking his own life had entered his mind, who was so inspired with the mere presence and bearing of a royal-hearted young man, one who had complete mastery of himself, and therefore a young man of power, that the very sight of him as he went to and fro in his daily work was a power that called his better self to the front again, awakened the God nature within him, so that he again set his face in the direction of the right, the true, the manly. And today there is no grander, stronger, more beautiful soul in all the wide country than he. Yes, there is a powerful influence that resolves itself into a service for all in each individual strong, pure, and noble life, that resolves itself into a service for all. And have the wonderful possibilities of what may be termed an inner or soul development ever come strongly to your notice? Perhaps not, for as yet only a few have begun to recognize under this name a certain great power that has always existed, a power that has never as yet been fully understood, and so has been called by this term and by that. It is possible so to develop this soul power that, as we stand merely and talk with a person, there goes out from us a silent influence that the person cannot see or hear, but that they feel, and the influences of which they cannot escape. That, as we merely go into a room in which several persons are sitting, there goes out from us a power, a silent influence that all will feel and will be influenced by, even though not a word be spoken. This has been the power of every man, of every woman, of great and lasting influence in the world's history. It is just beginning to come to us through a few highly illumined souls that this power can be grown, that it rests upon a great natural law that the author of our being has instituted within us and about us. It is during the coming years that we are to see many wonderful development along this line. For in this, as in many others, the light is just beginning to break. A few who are far up on the heights of human development are just beginning to catch the first few faint flushes of the dawn. Then live to your highest. This of itself will make you of great service to mankind, but without this you never can be. It makes no difference how hard you may try. And know, even so far as your own highest interests are concerned, that the true joy of existence comes from living to one's highest. This life, and this alone, will bring that which I believe to be one of the greatest characteristics of a truly great individual, humility. And when one says humility, he necessarily implies simplicity, for the two always go hand in hand. The one is born of the other. The proud, the vain, the haughty, those striving for effect, are never counted among the world's greatest personages. The very fact of one's striving for effect of itself indicates that there is not enough in the person to make them really great. While one who really is great never need concern themselves about it, nor do they ever. I can think of no better way for one to attain humility and simplicity than for one to have their mind off of self in the service of others. Vanity, that most dangerous quality, and especially for young people, is the outcome of one's always regarding self. Mrs. Henry Ward Beecher once said that when they lived in the part of Brooklyn known as the Heights, they could always tell when Mr. Beecher was coming in the evening from the voices and the joyous laughter of the children. All the street urchins, as well as the more well-to-do children in the vicinity, knew him and would often wait for his coming. When they saw him in the distance, they would run and gather around him, get hold of his hands into those large overcoat pockets for the nuts and the good things he so often filled them with before starting for home, knowing as he did full well what was coming, tug at him to keep him with them as long as they could, he all the time laughing or running as if to get away, never too great, rather let me say great enough, to join with them in their sports. that mysterious dignity of a man less great, therefore with less of humility and simplicity, with mind always intent upon self and his own standing, would have told him that possibly this might not be just the proper thing to do. But even the children, street urchins, as well as those well-to-do, found in this great loving soul a friend. Recall similar incidents in the almost daily life of Abe Lincoln and in the lives of all truly great men. All have that beautiful and ever powerful characteristic, that simple, childlike nature. Another most beautiful and valuable feature of this life is its effect upon one's own growth and development. There is a law which says that one cannot do a kind act or a loving service for another without its bringing rich returns to his own life and growth. This is an invariable law. Can I, then, do a kind act or a loving service for a brother or a sister, and all are such to me because children of the same Father? Why, I should be glad, doubly glad of the opportunity. If I do it thus out of love, forgetful of self, for all I know, it may do me more good than the one I do it for in its influence upon the growing of that rich, beautiful, and happy life it is mine to grow. Though the joy and satisfaction resulting from it, the highest, the sweetest, the keenest this life can know, are of themselves abundant reward. In addition to all this, it scarcely ever fails that those who are thus aided by some loving service may be in a position somehow, somewhere, somewhen, either directly or indirectly, and at a time when it may be most needed or most highly appreciated, to do in turn a kind service for him who, with never a thought of any possible return, has dealt kindly with them. So, quote, "Cast your bread upon the waters, far and wide your treasures strew. Scatter it with willing fingers, shout for joy to see it go. You may think it lost forever, but as sure as God is true, in this life and in the other, it will yet return to you." End quote. Have you sorrows or trials that seem very heavy to bear? Then let me tell you that one of the best ways in the world to lighten and sweeten them is to lose yourself in the service of others, in helping to bear and lighten those of a fellow being whose chance are much more grievous than your own. It is a great law of your being which says you can do this. Try it and experience the truth for yourself, and know that when turned in this way, sorrow is the most beautiful soul refiner of which the world knows, and hence not to be shunned, but to be welcomed and rightly turned. There comes to my mind a poor widow woman whose life would seem to have nothing in it to make it happy, but on the other hand cheerless and tiresome, and whose work would have been very hard had it not been for a crippled child she dearly loved and cared for, and it was all the more precious to her on account of its helplessness. Losing herself and forgetting her own hard lot in the care of the little cripple, her whole life was made cheerful and happy, and her work not hard, but easy, because lightened by love and service for another. And this is but one of innumerable cases of this kind. So you may turn your sorrows, you may lighten your burdens, by helping bear the burdens, if not of a crippled child, then of a brother or a sister who in another sense may be crippled, or who may become so, but for your timely service. You can find them all about you. Never pass one by. By building upon this principle, the poor may thus live as grandly and as happily as the rich, those in humble and lowly walks of life as grandly and as happily as those in what seem to be more exalted stations. Recognizing the truth, as we certainly must by this time, that one is truly great only so far as this is made the fundamental principle of his life, it becomes evident that the longing for greatness for its and for one's own sake falls away, and none but a diseased mind cares for it. For no sooner is it grasped then, As a bubble, it burst, because it is not the true, the permanent, but the false, the transient. On the other hand, one who, forgetting self and this kind of greatness, falsely so called, in the service of their fellow men, by this very fact puts themselves on the right track, the only track for the true, the genuine, and in what degree it will come to them depends entirely upon their adherence to the law. And do you know the influence of this life in the molding of the features, that it gives the highest beauty that can dwell there, the beauty that comes from within, the soul beauty, so often in the paintings of the old masters. True beauty must be grown from within. That outward veneering, which is so prevalent, can never be even a poor imitation if this type of the true, the genuine. To appreciate fully the truth of this, it is but necessary to look for a moment at that beautiful picture by Sant, The Soul's Awakening, a face that grows more beautiful each time one looks at it, and that one never tires of looking at, and compare with it the fractional parts of the apothecary shops we see now and then, or so often, to speak more truly, on the streets. A face of this higher type carries with it a benediction wherever it goes. A beautiful little incident came to my notice not long ago. It was a very hot and dusty day. The passengers on the train were weary and tired. The time seemed long and the journey cheerless. A lady with a face that carries a benediction to all who see her entered the car with a little girl, also of that type of beauty that comes from within, and with a voice musical, sweet, and sparkling, such as also comes from this source. The child, when they were seated, had no sooner spoken a few words before she began to enlist the attention of her fellow passengers. She began playing peekaboo with a staid and dignified old gentleman in the seat behind her. He at first looked at her over his spectacles, then lowered his paper a little, then a little more, and a little more. Finally, he dropped it altogether, and apparently forgetting himself and his surroundings, became oblivious to everything in the fascinating pleasure he was having with the little girl. The other passengers soon found themselves following his example. All papers and books were dropped. The younger folks gave way to joyous laughter, and all seemed to vie with each other in having the honor of receiving a word or a smile from the little one. The dust, the heat, the tired, cheerless feelings were all forgotten, and when these two left the car, the little girl waving them goodbye instinctively as one person, all the passengers waved to her in return, and two otherwise dignified gentlemen, leaving their rests, passed over to the other side and looked out the window to see her as long as they could. Something as an electrical spark seemed to have passed through the car. All were light-hearted and happy now, and the conditions in the car, compared to what they were before these two entered, would rival the work of the stereopticon so far as completeness of change is concerned. You have seen such faces and have heard such voices. They result from a life the kind we are considering. They are but its outward manifestations, spontaneous as the water from the earth as it bursts forth a natural fountain. We must not fail also to notice the effect of this life upon one's manners and bearing. True politeness comes from a life founded upon this great principle, and from this alone. This gives the true gentleman, gentle man, a man gentle, kind, loving, courteous from nature. Such a one can't have anything but true politeness, can't be anything but a gentle man. For one can't truly be anything but himself. So the one always intent upon and thinking of self cannot be the true gentleman, notwithstanding the artful contrivances and studied efforts to appear so, but which so generally reveal his own shallowness and artificiality, and disgust all with whom he comes in contact. I sometimes meet a person who, when introduced, will go through a series of stiff, cold, and angular movements, the knee at such a bend, the foot at such an angle, the back with such a bend or hump. much less pleasant to see than that of a camel or dromedary, for with these it is natural, so that I have found myself almost thinking, poor fellow, I wonder what the trouble is, whether he will get over it all right. It is so very evident that he all the time has his mind upon himself, wondering whether or not he is getting everything just right. What a relief to turn from such a one to one who, instead of thinking always of self, has continually in mind the ease and comfort and pleasure he can give to others, who in other words is the true gentleman, and with whom true politeness is natural. For one's every act is born of his thoughts. It is said that there was no truer gentleman in all Scotland than Robert Burns, and yet he was a farmer all his life, and had never been away from his native little rural village into a city until near the close of his life, when, taking the manuscripts that for some time had been accumulating in the drawer of his writing table up to Edinburgh, he captivated the hearts of all in the capital. Without studied contrivances, he was the true gentleman, and true politeness was his because his life was founded upon the principle that continually brought from his pen lines such as, quote, "It's coming yet, for that man to man, the world over, shall brothers be for that," end quote. And under the influence of this principle, he was a gentleman by nature, and one of nature's noblemen, without ever thinking whether he was or not, as he who is truly such never needs to and never does. And then recall the large-hearted Ben Franklin, when sent to the French court, in his plain gray clothes, unassuming and entirely forgetful of himself, how he captured the hearts of all, of even the giddy society ladies, and how he became and remained while there the center of attraction in that gay capital. His politeness, his manners, all the result of that great, kind, loving, and helpful nature which made others feel that it was they he was devoting himself to, and not himself. This little extract from a letter written by Franklin to George Whitefield will show how he regarded the great principle we are considering. Quote, "As to the kindness you mention, I wish it could have been of more service to you, but if it had, the only thanks I would desire is that you would always be equally ready to serve any other person that may need your assistance, and so let good offices go around, for mankind are all of a family. For my own part, when I am employed in serving others, I do not look upon myself as conferring favors, but as paying debts. In my travels and since my settlement, I have received much kindness from men to whom I shall never have an opportunity of making any direct return, and numberless mercies from God, who is infinitely above being benefited by our services. These kindnesses from men I can therefore only return on their fellow men, and I can only show my gratitude for these mercies from God by a readiness to help his other children and my brethren." End quote. No, true gentlemanliness and politeness always comes from within, and is born of a life of love, kindliness, and service. This is the universal language, known and understood everywhere, even when our words are not. There is, you know, a beautiful old proverb which says, quote, "He who is kind and courteous to strangers thereby shows himself a citizen of the world." End quote. And there is nothing so remembered and that so endears one to all mankind as this universal language. Even dumb animals understand it and are affected by it. How quickly the dog, for example, knows and makes it known when he is spoken to and treated kindly, or the reverse. And here shall not a word be spoken in connection with that great body of our fellow creatures whom, because we do not understand their language, we are accustomed to call dumb? The attitude we have assumed toward these fellow creatures and the treatment they have been subjected to in the past, something almost appalling. There are a number of reasons why this has been true. Has not one been on account of a belief in a future life for a man, but not for the animal? A few years ago, a gentleman left by will some $50,000 for the work of Henry Bergh's New York Humane Society. His relatives contested the will on the ground of insanity because he believed in a future life for animals. The judge, in giving his decision sustaining the will, stated that after a very careful investigation, he found that fully half the world shared the same belief. Agassiz thoroughly believed it. An English writer has recently compiled a list of over 170 English authors who have so thoroughly believed it as to write upon the subject. The same belief has been shared by many of the greatest thinkers in all parts of the world, and it is a belief that is constantly gaining ground. Another, and perhaps a chief, cause has been on account of a supposed inferior degree of intelligence on the part of animals, which in another form would mean that they are less able to care for and protect themselves. Should this, however, be a reason why they should be neglected and cruelly treated? Or should this not be the greatest reason why we should all the more zealously care for, protect, and kindly treat them? You or I may have a brother or a sister who is not normally endowed as to brain power, who perchance may be idiotic or insane, or who, through sickness or mishap, is weak-minded. But do we make this an excuse for neglecting, cruelly treating, or failing to love one? On the contrary, the very fact that he or she is not so able to plan for, care for, and protect his or herself is all the greater reason for all the more careful exercise of these functions on our part. But certainly, there are many animals around us with far more intelligence, at least manifested intelligence, than this brother or sister. The parallel holds, but the absurd falsity of the position we assume is most apparent. No truer nobility of character can anywhere manifest itself than is shown in one's attitude toward and treatment of those weaker or the so-called inferior, and so with less power to care for and protect themselves. Moreover, I think we should find that we are many times mistaken in regard to our beliefs in connection with the inferior intelligence of at least many animals. If, instead of using them simply to serve our own selfish ends without a just recompense, without a further thought than as to what we can get out of them, and that many times casting them off when broken or of no further service, and many times looking down upon, neglecting, or even abusing them, if, instead of this, we would deal equitably with them, love them, train and educate them the same as we do our children, we would be somewhat surprised at the remarkable degree of intelligence the dumb brutes possess, and also the remarkable degree of training they are capable of. What, however, can be expected of them when we take the attitude we at present hold toward them? Page after page might readily be filled with most interesting as well as inspiring portrayals of their superior intelligence, their remarkable capabilities under kind and judicious training, their faithfulness and devotion. The efforts of such noble and devoted workers as Henry Bergh in New York, of George T. Engel in Massachusetts, and many others in various parts of the country have already brought about a great change in our attitude toward and relations with this great body of our fellow creatures, and have made all the world more thoughtful, considerate, and kind. This, however, is just the beginning of a work that is assuming greater and even greater proportions. The work of the American Humane Education Society is probably surpassed in its vitality and far-reaching results by the work of no other society in the world today. Its chief object is the humane education of the American people, and through one phase of its work alone, its bands of mercy, over 25,000 of which have already been formed, giving regular, systematic humane training and instruction to between 1 and 2 million children, and these continually increasing in numbers, a most vital work is being done, such as no man can estimate. The humane sentiment inculcated in one's relation with the animal world and its resultant feelings of sympathy, tenderness, love, and care will inevitably manifest itself in one's relations with his fellows. And I, for one, would rejoice to see this work carried into every school throughout the length and breadth of the land. In many cases, this one phase of the child's training would be of far more vital value and import as he grows to manhood than all the rest of the schooling combined, and it would form a most vital entering wedge in the solution of our social situation. And why should we not speak to and kindly greet an animal as we pass it as instinctively as we do a human fellow being? Though it may not get our words, it will invariably get the attitude and the motive that prompts them, and will be affected accordingly. This it will do every time. Animals in general are marvelously sensitive to the mental conditions, the thought forces, and emotions of people. Some are peculiarly sensitive and can detect them far more quickly and unerringly than people can. It ought to help us greatly in our relations with them ever fully to realize that they, with us, are parts of the one universal life, simply different forms of the manifestation of the one life, having their part to play in the economy of the great universe, the same as we have ours, having their destiny to work out the same as we have ours, and just as important, just as valuable, in the sight of the all in all as we ourselves. Quote, I saw deep in the eyes of the animals the human soul look out upon me. I saw where it was born deep down under feathers and fur, or condemned for a while to roam 4-footed among the brambles. I caught the clinging mute glance of the prisoner, and swore I would be faithful. Thee, my brother and sister, I see, and mistake not. Do not be afraid. Dwelling thus for a while, fulfilling thy appointed time, thou too shalt come to thyself at last. Thy half-warm horns and long tongue lapping round my wrist do not conceal thy humanity any more than the learned talk of the pedant conceals his. For all thou art dumb, we have words and plenty between us. Come nigh, little bird, with yours half-stretched quivering wings within you. I behold choirs of angels, and the Lord himself in vista. End quote. But a small thing apparently is a kind look, word, or service of some kind. But oh, who can tell where it may end? It costs the giver comparatively nothing, but who can tell the priceless value to him who receives it? The cup of loving service, be it merely a cup of cold water, may grow and swell into a boundless river, refreshing and caring life and hope in turn to numberless others, and these to others, and so have no end. This may be just the critical moment in some life. Given now, it may save or change a life or a destiny. So don't withhold the bread that's in your keeping, but, quote, scatter it with willing fingers, shout for joy to see it go, end quote. There is no greater thing in life that you can do, and nothing that will bring you such rich and precious returns. The question is sometimes asked, how can one feel a deep and genuine love, a love sufficient to manifest itself in service for all? There are some so mean, so small, with so many peculiar, objectionable, or even obnoxious characteristics. True, very true, apparently at least, but another great law of life is that we find in men and women exactly those qualities, those characteristics we look for, or that are nearest akin to the predominant qualities or characteristics of our own natures. If we look for the peculiar, the little, the objectionable, these we shall find. But back of all this, all that is most apparent on the exterior, in the depths of each and every human soul, is the good, the true, the brave, the loving, the divine, the godlike. That never changes, the very God himself that at some time or another will show forth his full likeness. And still another law of life is that others usually manifest to us that which our own words, our own thoughts and emotions call forth. The same person, for example, will come to two different people in an entirely different way, because the larger, better, pure, and more universal nature of the one calls for the best, the noblest, the truest in him, while the smaller, critical, personal nature of the other calls forth the opposite. The wise man is therefore careful in regard to what he has to say concerning this of that one. For generally speaking, it is a sad commentary upon oneself if he find only the disagreeable, the objectionable. One lives always in the atmosphere of his own creation. Again, it is sometimes said, but such a one has such and such habits, or has done so and so, has committed such and such an error, or such and such a crime. But who, let it be asked, constituted me a judge of my fellow man? Do I not recognize the fact that the moment I judge my fellow man, by that very act I judge myself? One of two things: I either judge myself or hypocritically profess that never once in my entire life have I committed a sin, an error of any kind. Never have I stumbled, never fallen, and by that very profession I pronounce myself at once either a fool or a knave, or both. Again, it is said, but even for the sake of helping, of doing some service, I could not, for my own sake, for character's, for reputation's sake, I could not afford even to be seen with such a one. What would people, what would my friends think and say? True, apparently at least, but if my life, my character, has such a foundation so weak, so uncertain, so tottering as to be affected by anything of this kind, I had better than look well to it, and quietly, quickly, but securely begin to rebuild it. And when I am sure that it is upon the true, deep, substantial foundation, the only additional thing then necessary is for me to reach that glorious stage of development which quickly gets one out of the personal into the universal, or rather, that indicates that he is already out of the one and into the other, when he can say, "They think." What do they think? Let them think. They say. What do they say? Let them say. And then, the supreme clarity one should have when one realizes the fact that the great bulk of the sin and error in the world is committed not through choice, but through ignorance. Not that the person does not know many times that this or that course of action is wrong, that it is wrong to commit this error or sin or crime, but the ignorance comes in the belief that in this course of conduct they are deriving pleasure and happiness, and their ignorance of the fact that through a different course of conduct they would derive a pleasure, a happiness, much keener, higher, more satisfying, and enduring. Never should we forget that we are all the same in motive, pleasure, and happiness. We differ only in method, and this difference in method is solely by reason of some souls being at any particular time more fully evolved, and thus having a greater knowledge of the great immutable laws under which we live, and by putting the life into more and ever more complete harmony with these higher laws and forces, and in this way bringing about the highest, the keenest, the most abiding pleasure and happiness, instead of seeking it on the lower planes. While all are the same in essence, all a part of the one infinite, eternal, all with the same latent possibilities, all reaching ultimately the same place, it nevertheless is true that any particular time some are more fully awakened, evolved, unfolded. One should also be careful, if life is continuous, eternal, how he judges any particular life merely from these 80 years and 10. For the very fact of life, in whatever form, means continual activity, growth, advancement, unfoldment, attainment, and if there is the one, there must of necessity be the other. So in regard to this one or that one, no fears need be entertained. By the door of my woodland cabin stood during the summer a magnificent tuberose stock. The day was when it was just putting into bloom, and then I counted buds, latent flowers to the number of over a score. Some 8 or 10 one morning were now in full bloom. The ones nearer the top did not bloom forth until some 2 and 3 weeks later, and for some it took quite a month to reach the fully perfected stage. These certainly were not so beautiful, so satisfying as those already in perfect bloom, those that had already reached their highest perfection. But should they on this account be despised? Wait, and give the element of time an opportunity of doing its work, and you may find that by and by, when these have reached their highest perfection, they may even far transcend in beauty and in fragrance those at present so beautiful, so fragrant, so satisfying, those that we so much admire. Here we recognize the element of time. How foolish, how childish, how puerile to fail or even refuse to do the same when it comes to the human soul with all its godlike possibilities. And again, how foolish, because some of the blooms on the rose stalk bed had not reached their perfection as soon as others, to have pronounced them of no value, unworthy, and to have refused them the dews, the warm rains, the life-giving sunshine, the very agencies that hastened their perfected growth. Yet this puerile, unbalanced attitude is that taken by untold numbers in the world today toward many human souls on account of their less mature unfoldment at any given time. Why, the very fact that a fellow man and a brother has this or that fault, error, undesirable, or objectionable characteristic is of itself the very reason he needs all the more of charity, of love, of kindly help and aid than is needed by the one more fully developed, and hence more free from these. All the more reason is there why the best in him should be recognized and ever called to the front. The wise man is he who, when he desires to rid a room of darkness or gloom, does not attempt to drive it out directly, but who throws open the doors and the windows, that the room may be flooded with the golden sunlight. For in its presence darkness and gloom cannot remain. So the way to help a fellow man and a brother to the higher and better life is not by ever prating upon and holding up to view his errors, his faults, his shortcomings, any more than in the case of children, but by recognizing, ever calling forth the higher, the nobler, the divine, the godlike, by opening the doors and the windows of his own soul, and thus bringing about a spiritual perception, that he may be more carefully listen to the inner voice, that he may the more carefully follow the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. For in the exact proportion that the interior perception comes, will the outer life and conduct accord with it so far and no further. Where in all the world's history is to be found a more beautiful or valuable incident than this? A group of men, self-centered, self-assertive, have found a poor woman who in her blindness and weakness has committed an error the same one day that they, in all probability, have committed not once, but many times. For the rule is that they are first to condemn who are most at fault themselves. They bring her to the master. They tell him that she has committed a sin, more, that she has been taken in the very act, and ask what shall be done with her, informing him that, in accordance with the olden laws, such a one should be stoned. But, quicker than thought, the great incarnation of spiritual power and insight reads their motives, and after allowing them to give full expression to their accusations, he turns and calmly says, quote, "He among you that is without sin, let him cast the first stone." End quote. So saying, he stoops down as if he is writing in the sand. The accusers, feeling the keen and just rebuke, in the meantime sneak out until not one remains. The master, after all have gone, turns to the woman, his sister, and kindly and gently says, "And where are thine accusers? Doth no man condemn thee?" "No man, Lord." "And neither do I condemn thee. Go thou and sin no more." Oh, the beauty, the soul pathos. Oh, the royal-hearted brother. Oh, the invaluable lesson to us all. I have no doubt that this gentle, loving admonition, this calling of the higher and the better to the front, set into operation in her interior natures that hastened her progress from the purely animal, the unsatisfying, the diminishing, to the higher spiritual, the satisfying, the ever increasing, or even more, that made it instantaneous, but that in either case brought about the new birth that comes with the awakening of the soul out of its purely physical sense life to the higher spiritual perception and knowledge of itself, and thus the birth of the lighter out of the lower, as at some time or another comes to each and every human soul. And still another fact that should make us most charitable toward and slow to judge, or rather refuse to judge, a fellow man and a brother or sister, the fact that we cannot know the intense strugglings and fightings he or she may be subjected to, though accompanied, it is true, by numerous stumblings and fallings, though the latter we see, while the former we fail to recognize. Did we, however, know the truth of the matter, it may be that in the case of ourselves, who are so quick to judge, had the same temptations and fightings, the battle would not be half so nobly, so manfully fought, and our stumblings and fallings might be many times the number of his or of hers. Had we infinite knowledge and wisdom, our judgments would be correct, though, had we infinite knowledge and wisdom, we would be spared the task, though perhaps pleasure would seem to be the truer word to use, of our own self-imposed judgments. Even so then, if I cannot give myself in thorough love and service and self-devotion to each and all of the Father's other children, to every brother or sister, no matter what the rank, station, or apparent condition, it shows that at least one of several things is radically wrong with self. And it also indicates that I shall never know the full and supreme joy of existence until I am able to, and until I regard each case in the light of a rare and golden opportunity in which I take a supreme delight. Although what has just been said is true, at the same time, there are occasions when it must be taken with wise discretion, and although there are things it may be right for me to do for the sake of helping another life, at the same time, there are things it may be unwise for me to do. I have sympathy for a friend who is lying in the gutter, but it would be very unwise for me to get myself into the same condition and go and lie with them, thinking that only thus I could show my fullest sympathy and be of greatest help to them. On the contrary, it is only as I stand on the higher ground that I am able to reach forth the hand that will truly lift them up. The moment I sink myself to the same level, my power to help ceases. Just as unwise, to use a familiar example, far more unwise would it be for me, were I a woman, to think of marrying a man who is a drunkard or a libertine, thinking that because I may love him I shall be able to reform him. In the first place, I should find that the desired results could not be accomplished in this way, or rather, the results could be accomplished, and far more readily accomplished otherwise, and at far less expense. In the second place, I could not afford to subject myself to the demands, the influences of one such, and so either sink myself to his level, or if not, then be compelled to use the greater part of my time, thought, and energy in demonstrating over existing conditions, and keeping myself true to the higher life, the same time that might be used in helping the lives of many others. If I sink myself to his level, I do not help, but aid all the more in dragging him down. Or if I do not sink to his level, then to the degree that I approach it, do I lose my power over and influence with that life. Especially would it be unwise on my part if on his part there's no real desire for a different course, and no manifest endeavor to attain it. Many times it seems necessary for such a one to wallow in the deepest of the mire until, to use a commonplace phrase, he has his fill. He will then be ready to come out, will then be open to influence. I, in the meantime, instead of entering into the mire with him, instead of subjecting my life to his influences, will stand up on the higher ground and will ever point him upward, will even reach forth a hand to help him upward, and will thus subject him to the higher influences. And by preserving myself in this attitude, I can do the same for many other lives. In it all, there will be no bitterness, no condemnation, no casting off, but the highest charity, sympathy, and love. And it is only by this method that I can manifest the highest, only by this method that I can the most truly aid, for only as I am lifted up can I draw others unto me. In this matter of service, as in all other matters, that supreme regulator of human life and conduct, good common sense, must always be used. There are some natures, for example, whom the more we would do for, the more we would have to do for, who, in other words, would become dependent, losing their sense of self-dependence. For such, the highest service one can render is as judiciously and as indirectly as possible to lead them to the sense of self-reliance. Then there are others whose natures are such that the more they are helped, the more they expect, the more they demand, even as their right, who, in other words, are parasites or vultures of the human kind. In this case, again, the greatest service that can be rendered may be a refusal of service, a refusal of aid in the ordinary or rather expected forms, and a still greater service in the form of teaching them that great principle of justice, of compensation, that runs through all the universe, that for every service there must be in some form or another an adequate service in return. That the law of compensation in one form or another is absolute. And in fact, the greatest forms of service we can render anyone are, generally speaking, along the lines of teaching them the great laws of their own being, the great laws of their true possibilities and powers, and so the great laws of self-help. And again, it is possible for one whose heart goes out in love and service for all, and who, by virtue of lacking that long range of vision, or by virtue of not having a grasp of things in their entirety or wholeness, may have their time, their energies so dissipated in what seems to be the highest service, that they're continually kept from their own highest unfoldment, powers, and possessions, the very things that in their completeness would make them 1,000-fold more effective and powerful in their own life, and hence in the life of real service and influence. And in a case of this kind, many times the mark of the most absolute unselfishness is a strong and marked selfishness, which will prove, however, to be a selfishness only in the seeming. This self should never be lost sight of. It is the one thing of supreme importance, the greatest factor even in the life of the greatest service. Being always and necessarily precedes doing. Having always and necessarily precedes giving. But this law also holds that when there is the being, it is all the more increased by the doing. When there is the having, it is all the more increased by the giving. Keeping to oneself dwarfs and stultifies. Hoarding brings loss. Using brings even greater gain. In brief, the more we are, the more we can do. The more we have, the more we can give. The most truly successful, the most powerful and valuable life, then, is the life that is first founded upon this great, immutable law of love and service, and that then becomes supremely self-centered that it may become all the more supremely unself-centered. In other words, the life that looks well to self, that there may be the ever greater self, in order that there may be the ever greater service. End of chapter. Well, get back, Loretta. Wasn't that chapter full of so many golden nuggets? Leave me your comment. What golden nugget stood out for you? And if you haven't done so, share this channel with your friends, hit that like button, subscribe, and head over to the next video for the chapter 4 on the awakening.